The chipped porcelain doll, its painted smile fixed in an eternal vacant grin, sat atop the mantel in Aunt Alara's sun-drenched parlor. I was 7, perhaps 8, when I first truly noticed it, not just as a dusty ornament, but as a silent witness. My older sister, Bethany, a whirlwind of bright ribbons and even brighter demands, had always dismissed it, preferring the noisy clatter of her tea sets. But that summer, after Mama died, Aunt Alara would often trace the doll's hairline with a delicate finger, her gaze far away, a quiet sorrow in her eyes that mirrored my own. I remember one sweltering afternoon, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and unspoken grief, Aunt Alara murmuring, "This was your mother's, dear," her comfort when things were unclear. And for a second, no one said a word. The doll, in its small, unblinking way, seemed to absorb the weight of that truth, a truth that, then, I couldn't grasp. It sat there, still, while Bethany pranced through the house, already claiming Mama's silver locket, her pearl earrings, things she could show off. The doll, quiet and unassuming, was left untouched. If this sounds like your silence, stay. You don't owe them your forgiveness. Not anymore. And if you know a woman who carried too much for too long, give her this story. My name is Evelyn. I'm 72 now, and my voice, though it may sound frail, carries the weight of decades spent in silent observation, in the meticulous gathering of details. Bethany, my sister, she died 3 weeks ago. Cancer, swift and merciless. Her funeral was a spectacle, as everything in her life had been. A grand affair, filled with people who spoke of her boundless generosity, her vibrant spirit, her unwavering loyalty. They called it family. I knew it was merely a stage. For years I watched Bethany, watched her spin narratives, twist intentions, and most crucially, watch her slowly, systematically, dismantle the life Mama had intended for me. The porcelain doll, that small, seemingly insignificant thing, became my compass. Every time Bethany subtly steered a conversation away from Mama's will, every time she misplaced a document, every time she reassured me, with that saccharine smile that everything was being handled, I'd see that doll in my mind's eye, unblinking, unconvinced. Mama had not been a wealthy woman in the grand sense, but she had been meticulously organized, painstakingly fair. Her will initially was clear: the small family cottage in Vermont, a modest sum for each of us, and a specific trust fund set aside for my education, as I had always dreamt of studying literature, a path Mama championed. Bethany, however, had always dismissed my quiet pursuits, seeing them as frivolous. "Get a real job, Ev," she'd say, waving a dismissive hand. "Books won't pay the bills." The cottage was the first to go. Bethany claimed it was too much for her to manage alone after Mama passed, despite her husband Richard being a successful real estate agent. She proposed selling it, dividing the proceeds equally. I was too wrapped in my grief, too naive to question. I signed the papers, trusting her. She said the market was poor, that the value had depreciated significantly. I believed her. She presented a figure. I accepted it. I didn't harm them. I merely stopped shielding them from the truth of their own making. Years later, a chance conversation with a local from Vermont revealed that the cottage had sold for nearly 3 times the amount she had declared. Richard, it turned out, had orchestrated the sale through a shell company, a quick, clean profit. A quiet gasp escaped me then. a realization that was both chilling and clarifying. The first crack had truly widened. The trust fund for my education was another slow, agonizing bleed. Bethany, as the executor of Mama's estate, managed it. She'd send me small, sporadic disbursements, always with an apology. "Market's down, darling. The interest rates are terrible. It's barely yielding anything." She'd suggest I get a part-time job, take on loans, defer my dreams. And for a second, no one said a word. Her words, so soft, so seemingly sympathetic, were poisoned. I started working at the local library, stacking books, wiping down tables, watching my dreams slowly recede into the distance. All the while, Bethany was building her lavish life. New cars, extravagant vacations, renovations to her sprawling suburban home. She'd show me photos, oblivious or perhaps deliberately cruel, to the quiet erosion of my own future. I began to keep a journal, not just of my feelings, but of facts, dates, times, specific conversations, the exact figures Bethany would quote. I started collecting bank statements, even seemingly insignificant receipts. I didn't know then what I would do with this information, but an instinct, cold and clear, told me to hold on to it, to document the slow, insidious theft, not of money alone, but of opportunity, of my mother's final wishes, of my very potential. This wasn't about being excluded. It was about dismantling their carefully constructed lie. There were moments, many of them, when the rage would swell, hot and guttural. But it would dissipate, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. Overt confrontation was not my style. It was not Bethany's either, not directly. Her weapon was subtlety, persuasion, the slow grind of neglect and manipulation. And I realized, with a chilling clarity, that my weapon would have to be the same. Quiet, precise, undeniable. I spent years, decades even, perfecting my understanding of their methods. I learned about shell corporations, about the legal loopholes they exploited, about the art of making a paper trail disappear, or, more accurately, making it so convoluted that a casual glance would see nothing amiss. I didn't hire private investigators or confront them with accusations. Instead, I became my own investigator, a quiet scholar of their deceits. I learned to read between the lines of financial reports, to spot the anomalies in public records, to piece together the mosaic of their dishonesty from fragments they thought were too small to matter. I frequented the county records office, ostensibly researching local history for my library job, but in truth, I was tracing the paper lineage of Mama's properties, cross-referencing dates, names, and transfer values. The public access computers became my quiet allies. And then, a few months before Bethany's diagnosis, I received a cryptic package, an old yellowed envelope with no return address. Inside, a single faded photograph of Mama, young and radiant, holding the porcelain doll. On the back, in Mama's familiar, elegant script, was a date, October 14th, 1952, and a single word, trust. It was bewildering, a puzzle I hadn't known existed, but it felt significant, like a final quiet message from Mama, urging me to look deeper, to trust my instincts. Some battles aren't fought with shouts. They're won with undeniable truth. The photograph, that small, faded clue, became another thread in the intricate tapestry I was weaving. Trust. Mama's single word, written in her elegant hand, resonated with an almost physical weight. It spurred me to revisit everything. I started with the local public library's archives, poring over old newspapers, microfiche records. My search wasn't for anything specific at first, just an instinct, a feeling that Mama, in her meticulous way, might have left breadcrumbs. She was a woman who believed in the power of quiet truth, who understood that things hidden in plain sight often held the most significant revelations. And for a second, no one said a word. The silence of the archives, the rustle of old papers, it felt like time itself was slowing, allowing me to delve deeper into the past, into the layers Bethany had so carefully constructed. I spent weeks, then months, commuting to the county seat, always under the guise of genealogical research, something a quiet librarian could easily explain. I traced land deeds, property transfers, old tax records. It was tedious work, often frustrating, but each small discovery fueled my determination. They preached forgiveness. I chose reckoning. What I unearthed was a master class in quiet deception. Mama, it turned out, had not just owned the Vermont cottage. She had inherited a small, undeveloped parcel of land adjacent to it, land that had been in our family for generations, specifically designated in an older, pre-Bethany-influenced will to be held in trust for future educational pursuits of Evelyn Rose. This was a document Bethany had never mentioned, a document meticulously sealed and filed away by Mama's original lawyer, a kind, elderly gentleman who had passed away years before Mama. Bethany, as executor, had been legally obligated to disclose all testamentary documents. She hadn't. This undeveloped land, it turned out, had been purchased years ago by Richard, Bethany's husband, through a series of shell companies. He'd acquired it for a pittance, claiming it was unbuildable wetland. But I found the zoning changes quietly approved years later, the permits for a luxury development, the glossy brochures I dismissed as junk mail in Bethany's own mailbox. The unbuildable wetland was now the site of Ilara's Ridge, a collection of high-end vacation homes, named ironically after our aunt. A cruel twist of the knife, referencing our beloved Aunt Ilara, who had always championed fairness. The magnitude of their betrayal settled over me like a shroud, cold and heavy. It wasn't just the cottage, it was this hidden parcel, my educational trust, systematically diverted, my future quietly sold off for their lavish present. My silence hadn't been weakness, it had been a fertile ground for their deceit. I understood then that Mama's single word, trust, wasn't a plea for me to trust others, but a quiet command for me to trust myself, to trust my own instincts, my own careful observations, to know that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, would always surface if one was patient enough to dig. I started taking photographs with my small digital camera, screenshots of public land records, copies of archived zoning permits, images of the Ilara's Ridge development plans, cross-referencing everything with the financial statements Bethany had sent me over the years, the ones claiming the market was down. The disparity was staggering. The numbers didn't lie. Her words did. I created a separate digital folder, password protected, meticulously organizing every single piece of evidence. I even found old photos from childhood vacations at the Vermont cottage, images of Mama pointing out the undeveloped land, talking about how, one day, Evelyn, this will help you reach for the stars. My internal world, once clouded by grief and a misplaced trust, became crystal clear. The subtle dynamics, the unspoken tensions of my childhood, the way Bethany always took the largest portion, the easiest path, the brightest spotlight. It all clicked into place. She hadn't just been a demanding older sister, she'd been a predator in waiting, her charm a carefully crafted lure. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source, Aunt Alara's old address book, which I found tucked away in a box of old keepsakes. Inside, among faded entries, was the name and number of Mama's original lawyer's former secretary, a woman named Martha, who was now living in a retirement community. On a whim, I called her. Martha, with a wonderfully sharp mind, remembered Mama fondly. She even remembered the specific instructions Mama had given about the Evelyn Rose Education Trust and the land parcel tied to it, mentioning how unusual it was for a client to be so specific about their intentions for a younger child's future. She confirmed that Mama had gone to great lengths to ensure my portion was protected. Her recollection was precise, almost photographic. Martha unknowingly became an invaluable witness, a living testament to Mama's true intentions. I compiled everything into a meticulously organized file. Not a single accusation, just facts, dates, documents. A cold, hard reflection of their choices. I didn't plan to scream or to rage. I planned a whisper that would echo for a lifetime. The cancer, when it came for Bethany, was aggressive, stealing her breath in gasps, dimming the vibrant sparkle she had always used to mesmerize. Her final days were spent in a sterile hospital room, a stark contrast to the opulent home she had built on the foundation of Mama's hidden generosity. I visited her, of course, not out of affection, but out of a quiet, unyielding sense of purpose. I sat by her bedside, listening to the hurried whispers of nurses, the rhythmic beeping of machines. She was frail, her once commanding voice reduced to a raspy whisper. She barely acknowledged my presence, lost in a haze of pain medication and fading consciousness. And for a second, no one said a word. I watched her, this sister who had stolen my inheritance, my opportunities, my mother's legacy. There was no anger left in me, only a profound sense of clarity. The years of quiet suffering, the meticulous collection of facts, had distilled my emotions into something cold, precise, and utterly devoid of malice. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about balance, about truth, about ensuring that the scales, so heavily tipped in her favor for so long, would finally, irrevocably, even out. Her funeral was as she would have wanted it, grand, tearful, filled with effusive praise from those who only saw the polished veneer. Richard, her husband, delivered a eulogy choked with emotion, painting her as a saint, a pillar of the community, a loving sister. I sat in the back row, a quiet observer, a ghost in my own family's narrative. The porcelain doll, the one that had sat on Aunt Alara's mantel, had come to me after Alara passed. I had kept it, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, a silent reminder. It was with me now, nestled in my handbag. As the eulogies concluded, and the mourners began to file past the open casket for one final viewing, I rose. My steps were slow, deliberate. I felt no tremor, no hesitation. This was a moment decades in the making. My heart, strangely, was calm, peaceful even. I reached the casket, the scent of lilies heavy in the air. Bethany lay there, her face serene in death, a stark contrast to the restlessness that had defined her life. Richard stood nearby accepting condolences, his eyes red-rimmed but his posture still bearing the faint arrogance of a man accustomed to having his way. He glanced at me, a fleeting nod, perhaps surprised I was even there. I leaned over the casket as if to whisper a final farewell. My hand, steady and unshakable, reached into my handbag. I didn't speak. There was no need for words. Instead, I carefully placed the neatly bound file, slim but heavy with decades of documented truth, into Bethany's open hands. The cover page, visible to anyone who might look closely, read, "The Evelyn Rose Education Trust, a record of discrepancies." It contained the copies of the original will, the land deeds, the zoning changes, the luxury development plans, Martha's sworn affidavit about Mama's intentions, and every single financial statement Bethany had sent me, side by side with the true market values. The porcelain doll, its vacant smile unchanged, went beside it, a silent sentinel. Richard, standing just a few feet away, saw the papers. His eyes, though grief-stricken, sharpened. He took a half-step forward, a flicker of alarm in his gaze. But it was too late. Other mourners, moving slowly past, began to notice. A few leaned in, their expression shifting from solemnity to curiosity, then to something akin to shock as they glimpsed the title on the file, the stark contrast of the doll. This wasn't a shout. It was a truth, delivered in the quietest, most undeniable way imaginable. A hushed murmur began to ripple through the line of mourners. It started subtly, a ripple of quiet whispers, then grew into an undeniable hum of discomfort. Richard, still standing rigid, his face paling, finally reached for the file. His hand trembled as he carefully lifted it from Bethany's grasp, almost as if he feared disturbing the dead, or perhaps feared what he was about to disturb. He didn't open it there, not fully, but the cover, the words, "The Evelyn Rose Education Trust, a record of discrepancies," was clear enough, and for a second, no one said a word. The silence in the room was no longer reverent. It was taut, charged with unspoken questions. I stepped back, allowing the line to move forward, to let the silent exhibition I had orchestrated speak for itself. My role was complete. There was no need for grand pronouncements, no dramatic accusations. The truth, in its raw, undeniable form, lay in Bethany's hands, a quiet testament to her life's shadowed dealings. It was a truth that now, in her death, could no longer be dismissed or spun away with a charming smile. This wasn't about being excluded. It was about dismantling their carefully constructed lie. I watched as Richard, clutching the file, excused himself from the line, his face a mask of bewildered shock and dawning horror. He retreated to a side room, a small glass-walled office typically used by the funeral director. Through the glass, I could see him fumbling with the file, his eyes scanning the pages, his once confident demeanor visibly crumbling. Others, close friends of Bethany, prominent figures in the community, had already seen enough. Their whispers grew louder, their gazes shifting from the casket to Richard, then to me, a silent narrative unfolding before their very eyes. The porcelain doll, with its unwavering gaze, seemed to judge them all. Later, at the repast, a subdued affair held at a local country club, the usual boisterous energy was absent. People spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting, their conversations stilted. The air was thick with questions that no one dared to ask aloud. Richard was nowhere to be seen. His eldest son, Bethany's nephew, approached me, his young face etched with confusion. "Aunt Evelyn," he began, his voice hesitant. What was that file?" I met his gaze, calm and steady. "It's a record, dear," I said, my voice soft but firm enough to carry. "A record of your grandmother's true intentions and of what happened to them." I offered no more, no dramatic exposé. The seeds had been planted. The truth, like a persistent weed, would find its way through the cracks. They preached forgiveness. I chose reckoning. In the days that followed, the ripple effect began. Quiet at first, then gaining momentum. The property deeds for Alara's Ridge were suddenly under scrutiny. Local news outlets, always keen for a scandal involving prominent families, began to pick up on the whispers, on the sudden, unexplained withdrawal of Richard from public life. The name Evelyn Rose Education Trust began to appear in hushed conversations, then in online forums. Richard's business, once thriving, saw a sudden downturn. Clients quietly pulled out. Deals fell through. The financial and reputational consequences, meticulously documented in that file, were beginning to manifest. I didn't lift a finger. I didn't make a single phone call to a journalist. I didn't engage in gossip. The truth, once released, had its own unstoppable momentum. I didn't harm them. I merely stopped shielding them from the truth of their own making. It was a slow, agonizing process for them, I knew. Not a sudden, dramatic fall, but a gradual, inexorable slide into public disfavor and financial ruin. A quiet yet devastating unraveling. I found a profound sense of peace in this. It wasn't the aggressive, destructive vengeance of a younger woman. It was the calm, settled satisfaction of a woman who had meticulously balanced the scales, who had given the truth its voice. I returned to my quiet life, to my books at the library, to my small, orderly home. The porcelain doll now sits on my own mantel, no longer a symbol of unresolved pain, but of quiet strength, of persistent truth. It smiles eternally. But now, to me, it smiles with understanding. My mother's legacy, my own stolen future, would not be fully reclaimed in monetary terms. Some things, once lost, cannot be fully restored. But the justice I sought wasn't purely financial. It was about the truth, about acknowledging the quiet, insidious betrayals that had shaped my life, and ensuring that those who perpetrated them were forced to face the consequences, not in a courtroom with lawyers and histrionics, but in the quiet judgment of their own community, their own conscience, their own unraveling lives. The silence that now surrounds me is not empty. It is filled with the quiet hum of a life reclaimed, a spirit freed. The whispers of the past no longer haunt me. They are merely echoes, reminders of a battle fought and won with the most powerful weapon of all, undeniable truth.